The evening air was warm and buzzing with soft chatter. The charity hall was lit with golden lights, reflecting off crystal chandeliers and polished wooden floors. Elegant guests, dressed in suits and dresses, moved gracefully around the room, holding glasses of sparkling drinks and discussing donations, investments, and their latest ventures. At the center of it all, a grand piano sat in the corner, gleaming under the lights, waiting silently as if it already knew something remarkable was about to happen. Among the crowd moved a young waitress. She was quiet, almost blending into the background. Her uniform was simple but tidy, her hair tied back in a neat ponytail, and her steps careful as she carried trays with drinks and hors d'oeuvres. She smiled politely at guests, answering questions and requests with gentle patience. She had done this job for years, moving from table to table, always working hard, always unnoticed. Tonight was no different. She thought of it as just another evening, another shift, but not everyone ignored her. A wealthy philanthropist, sitting near the center of the room, had noticed her almost immediately. He was a man known for his sharp eye for talent, for spotting potential in people and projects. He had built a life where success and wealth followed him, but he rarely trusted appearances. He often said that the world revealed its secrets only to those who looked carefully. And tonight, his attention was caught by someone he almost dismissed at first glance. He watched the young waitress with curiosity. There was something different about the way she moved, calm, precise, and yet gentle. He wondered how someone so ordinary-looking could have the kind of presence that naturally drew his attention. He leaned back in his chair and whispered to a colleague, "I wonder if she does anything besides serving drinks. Could she play?" His colleague laughed softly. "Play? You mean piano? Come on, she's just a waitress." The philanthropist smirked, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. "You never know until you try." He called the waitress over with a polite gesture. She approached carefully, her tray balanced in one hand. "Excuse me, sir?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. "I don't mean to bother you," the philanthropist said with a charming smile, "but I'm curious, do you play the piano?" The question surprised her. She blinked, unsure if he was joking. Most people never asked for questions like this. Most people assumed she was just there to serve them, nothing more. She hesitated, unsure how to answer. I play a little," she said finally, keeping her voice humble. "A little, huh?" he said, his smile growing. "Would you mind showing us, right here?" Her heart skipped a beat. The room had quieted slightly, and a few guests had begun to notice the exchange. Some raised eyebrows, curious about the unusual request. The waitress took a deep breath. She had played piano all her life, trained in ways few would ever guess, yet she rarely revealed it. Life had a way of changing plans, and now she worked as a waitress to support her family. But now, standing there in this elegant room, she felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She nodded, almost to herself, and set the tray down carefully. As she walked toward the grand piano, the murmurs of the guests grew louder. Some whispered with amusement, "Do you think she can really play? This should be interesting." "I doubt it. She's just a waitress." She ignored the voices, focusing on the polished keys in front of her. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, feeling the smooth surface under her touch. The piano seemed to respond to her presence, as if waiting for the music to begin. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering long hours spent at a smaller, older piano at home, practicing scales, chords, and songs she loved. She remembered the joy she had once felt when music filled a room, the way it could make people smile, cry, or stop and listen. The philanthropist leaned forward, his curiosity now tinged with doubt. He had expected a simple, polite gesture at best. Maybe a few notes or a tiny melody. He never expected anything more. Around him, the guests watched silently, some skeptical, some intrigued. It was not every day that a waitress was asked to play a grand piano in front of a room full of wealthy donors. Some of the women whispered to each other, smiling politely. While the men exchanged skeptical glances, she began with a gentle note, soft and almost hesitant. The sound filled the corner of the room and floated gently toward the crowd. It was simple, yet there was something in it, an elegance, a warmth that immediately drew attention. The philanthropist raised an eyebrow, leaning back slightly, surprised at the clarity of her touch. The note lingered in the air, almost like an invitation. Then, she played another note and another, slowly forming a melody that seemed both familiar and unique. She didn't rush. She allowed the music to breathe, to grow naturally. The crowd began to quiet, sensing that something unexpected was happening. People who had been talking now leaned in slightly, unable to look away. The room, once filled with casual chatter, became silent, filled only with the soft resonance of the piano. For a moment, the philanthropist forgot himself. He watched, fascinated, as her fingers moved across the keys with confidence and grace. It was clear she was not just a casual player. Her movements were precise, her posture elegant, and the music itself carried emotion deep, raw, and moving. She played with a subtle passion that seemed to tell a story. A story she had never spoken aloud, but now shared through each note. Some guests shifted in their seats, leaning closer to hear better. They were no longer thinking about their drinks or their conversations. They were drawn entirely to the music. The waitress, still focused on the piano, did not glance at anyone. She was lost in the moment, letting her memories and emotions guide her hands. Each note seemed to resonate with the guests' hearts, stirring feelings they had not expected to feel at a charity event. The philanthropist felt a mixture of amazement and disbelief. How could someone so young, so unassuming, play with such skill and emotion? It was as if she had a secret world inside her, a world of music that she had kept hidden from the world. His initial doubt faded completely, replaced by wonder. The simple question he had asked in jest now seemed almost foolish, for he had no idea what he was about to witness. Time seemed to slow as she continued playing. The melody grew richer, more complex, yet it never lost its gentle beauty. It was clear she had trained for years, yet it was more than skill, it was artistry. The guests, now fully captivated, listened. In silence, their earlier skepticism replaced by awe. Some held their breath, others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. The room felt smaller, more intimate, despite the grandeur around them. Finally, she paused, letting the last note linger in the air like a soft echo. For a few seconds, no one moved, as if afraid to break the spell. Then applause slowly began to rise, hesitant at first, and then stronger, louder, filling the hall. The philanthropist stood, clapping with genuine admiration, his eyes shining with surprise. The guests followed, some cheering, some whistling, all of them stunned by the unexpected talent they had just witnessed. The waitress looked up, her face calm but slightly flushed. She smiled softly, grateful for the moment, but not for the attention. She had simply done what she loved, sharing a part of herself that few had ever seen. The philanthropist, still astonished, stepped forward, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? How could someone with such talent end up working as a waitress? The curiosity in his eyes was unmistakable, and the room, now buzzing with excitement, seemed to anticipate that a revelation was coming that night in that grand hall. Filled with wealthy and influential guests, a quiet waitress had changed everything. She had shown that appearances could be deceiving, that talent could hide in the most unlikely places, and that even the most skeptical observer could be moved by something pure and unexpected. And as she returned to her tray, collecting it carefully, from the floor, the philanthropist knew that this was only the beginning of a story no one in that room would ever forget. The applause from the guests still echoed softly around the room as the waitress returned to her tray, her movements calm and composed despite the sudden attention. She had never liked being the center of attention, and yet tonight, the piano had pulled her into the spotlight in a way she had not anticipated. For her, it had never been about impressing anyone, it had always been about the music itself. But now, the room was filled with people staring at her with admiration, curiosity, and a hint of disbelief. The philanthropist, still standing near the piano, was the first to break the silence. He walked slowly toward her, his steps deliberate, his eyes fixed on hers. There was something in her playing that had unsettled him, in the best possible way. He had expected a polite, amateur attempt, but what he had just witnessed was far beyond that. It was clear she had trained extensively, and not just casually. Her fingers had the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours perfecting each note, someone who understood music in a deep and emotional way. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. That was, incredible. You have talent that most people only dream of. Where did you learn to play like that? The waitress hesitated for a moment. She was used to keeping her past to herself. Few people had ever asked about her life, and fewer still had seemed genuinely interested. Her fingers brushed the tray nervously, as if grounding herself before answering. I learned when I was young," she said softly. "I had lessons for many years, but life changed my plans." The philanthropist raised his eyebrows. "Changed your plans?" he asked. "You could have a career in music. Why would life make you give that up?" Her gaze drifted to the floor for a moment. "Family obligations," she said simply. "Sometimes we do what we must, even if it means leaving behind something we love, music. It has always been a part of me, but I had to put it aside for a while." He nodded slowly, clearly intrigued. There was a seriousness in her tone, a depth of experience that he had not expected from someone so young. He could see the strength it must have taken to carry on with life, to work hard and remain humble, even while holding such a hidden talent. He realized then that what made her performance so striking was not just skill, it was emotion, maturity, and a lifetime of experiences hidden behind a quiet exterior. Around them, the guests had begun to murmur again. Some were still clapping softly, still processing what they had just heard. Others exchanged whispers, trying to make sense of the situation. "Did she really just play that?" One guest asked. "I can't believe it. She's a waitress." The philanthropist turned his attention back to her. Would you consider playing again?" he asked, his voice careful but sincere. "Not for me, but for everyone here. I think they would love to hear more." The waitress looked at the grand piano again. The polished surface seemed to invite her, and the keys glimmered under the warm lights. She could feel the weight of the room's attention, but it no longer intimidated her. Music had always been her sanctuary, and tonight it had become a bridge between her and the world outside her small, quiet life. She nodded slightly, signaling that she would play again. As she returned to the piano, the room fell into a hush. Even the waitstaff paused, holding trays in midair, watching as she took her seat. The philanthropist stood nearby, observing her every movement, now fully invested in what was about to happen. Guests shifted in their seats, leaning forward, some craning their necks to get a better view. The skepticism that had been in the room at the beginning of the evening had been replaced with anticipation. As if everyone sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding, her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, feeling the familiar texture beneath them. She closed her eyes briefly and let her memory guide her. Every movement, every note she was about to play, came from years of practice and passion, years of hidden talent that few had ever seen. She began with a soft, flowing melody, delicate but confident. The music had a way of telling a story without words, pulling the listeners into her world. The philanthropist felt it immediately. It was different this time. Her first performance had been beautiful, but this one carried a deeper intensity, a subtle strength that made the audience lean in, captivated. The melody swelled and softened, rising and falling like the gentle waves of a calm sea. Each chord was played with precision, yet there was warmth in every note, a hint of emotion that spoke of life's struggles, sacrifices, and quiet triumphs. Guests who had been chatting or laughing before were now completely silent. They watched her fingers move across the keys, seemingly effortlessly, yet with a controlled power that made every note count. The room seemed smaller, more intimate, even though it was filled with dozens of people. It was as if she had created a private space within the grand hall, where the music alone held meaning. The philanthropist could no longer contain his amazement. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together. He had seen many talented performers in his life, but there was something rare about this moment. The waitress was not just playing the piano, she was expressing herself, telling a story that resonated deeply, even with those who had no idea what her life had been like. Every note carried weight, every pause invited reflection. Some guests had tears in their eyes, unable to explain why this performance moved them so much. It was more than technical skill. It was sincerity, honesty, and the quiet strength of someone who had faced life's challenges with grace. Others whispered softly to their neighbors, sharing their amazement. "I've never heard anything like this," one woman said. "How is it possible that she's been working as a waitress all this time?" The philanthropist finally spoke again, unable to keep his thoughts to himself. "Your music. It's extraordinary," he said, his voice low but filled with genuine admiration. "You have the talent of someone who has devoted their life to this. How have you hidden this all these years?" The waitress smiled faintly, her eyes still on the piano. "Sometimes life asks us to take a different path," she said. "I've always loved music, but there were other responsibilities I had to take care of. Tonight. It feels good to share it again." The philanthropist nodded slowly, impressed not only by her skill, but also by her humility. Here was someone who could have easily sought fame or recognition long ago, yet she had chosen to remain grounded, working quietly and caring for those around her. There was a strength in her character that matched the power of her performance, and he found himself admiring her even more. As she continued to play, the room seemed to transform. The warm lighting reflected off the piano, casting soft shadows across her focused face. The audience, initially skeptical and amused, was now fully engaged, as if held in the spell of her music. Each note was a conversation, each chord a message. People forgot their positions, their titles, their social status. They were simply listeners, fully immersed in the story. She was telling with her hands and heart. The waitress played with a fluidity that made everything seem effortless. Yet every movement was precise and intentional. Her fingers danced across the keys, creating melodies that were both beautiful and moving. The philanthropist watched in silence, captivated, realizing that the earlier doubts he had held were completely unfounded. He had never expected to witness such depth and emotion from someone he had assumed was just a waitress. By the time she finished, the room was silent for a moment, as if no one wanted to break the magic. Then slowly, applause began to rise, gentle at first, then building into a steady, enthusiastic wave. Some guests stood, clapping and cheering, while others wiped tears from their eyes. The philanthropist stepped forward, clapping with genuine admiration, his eyes shining with awe. The waitress looked up at him, her expression calm, almost shy. She had shared a piece of herself, a secret she had carried for years, and the reaction was overwhelming but humbling. She had not sought attention, yet tonight, she had captured the hearts of an entire room. The philanthropist's curiosity was now stronger than ever. He had to know more. Who was this young woman? How had she developed such remarkable talent? And most importantly, how could someone with such ability have lived a life that kept her in the shadows until now? He realized that this moment was only the beginning, that there was much more to her story than anyone in the room had imagined. As the guests continued to clap and murmur in awe, the waitress returned to her tray, collecting it carefully and moving among the tables. She served with the same grace and patience as before, but now there was a quiet pride in her eyes, a knowledge that she had shared something meaningful. The philanthropist followed her gaze, recognizing that she had given the room more than just music. She had given them a glimpse of her soul, and that was far more powerful than anything else. The night continued, but the energy had shifted. Guests spoke less about donations and more about the music they had just heard. Whispers of admiration and curiosity followed the waitress wherever she went. The philanthropist, still observing her, knew that the real story had just begun, and he was determined to learn more about the young woman who had transformed a simple charity event into an unforgettable evening. By the time the applause slowly faded, the atmosphere inside the hall had completely changed. What had started as a normal charity evening had now turned into something personal, emotional, and deeply surprising. Guests who had arrived with confidence and social pride were now sitting quietly, as if they had all just shared the same unexpected experience. The waitress moved gently between the tables again, carrying her tray as she always did, but this time people looked at her differently. They no longer saw just a server. They saw a hidden talent, a story waiting to be told. The philanthropist kept watching her from across the room. He was not doing it in a suspicious way, but with deep curiosity and respect. His mind kept going back to the way her fingers touched the keys, the emotion in every note, and the calm strength in her face. He had met many gifted people in his life, but most of them openly carried their talent wherever they went. This was different. This was someone who had chosen silence over spotlight after some time. As the event slowly settled into quieter conversations, he found the right moment to approach her again. She was placing empty glasses onto a tray near the side of the hall. He stopped a few steps away, not wanting to startle her. "You played again like someone who never left the piano," he said gently. She looked up and smiled politely. "Thank you," she replied. "I don't get to play often anymore, but once I touch the keys, it all comes back." He nodded slowly. "That kind of connection doesn't disappear. It only sleeps." She gave a small smile at his words, but didn't speak much more. Her nature had always been quiet. She was not used to people asking her questions, especially about music. Most days, people only cared about whether their glass was full or their food was warm. After a short pause, he asked, "Would you mind if I sit with you for a moment? I would like to understand your story, if you're comfortable sharing." She hesitated. For a second, she almost said no. Talking about her past was not easy. It carried memories of dreams she had once held close and the sacrifices that had forced her to let those dreams go. But something in his voice felt sincere. There was no pride in it, no show of power. Just real curiosity. She nodded lightly. They both moved to a quiet corner near the window, away from the noise of the main hall. The city lights outside shimmered through the glass. "I never planned for this life," she began slowly. "I grew up with music. It wasn't just a hobby. It was my world." He listened carefully, saying nothing. "My family was not wealthy, but they believed in my talent. They saved every small amount they could so I could learn properly. I practiced for hours every day. Sometimes my fingers would ache, but I never complained. I loved every second." She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts, but then things changed. "My father fell sick. Long treatments, hospital visits, and bills that never seemed to end. Music lessons became a luxury we could no longer afford." The philanthropist felt a tightness in his chest. He had heard many stories of struggle before, but this one felt closer than most. Perhaps it was the way she spoke, without bitterness, without complaint. "Just simple truth. I started working while still very young," she continued. "At first, it was just to help a little. But then my responsibilities grew. I took on more shifts, more work, more pressure. Piano slowly moved into the background of my life. And yet, it never left you," he said softly. She looked at her hands. "No, it never did." The rest of the evening passed with a strange calm. Guests started leaving one by one, still talking about the unexpected performance. Some tried to speak to her, offering praise or kind words. She thanked them politely each time, but she did not seek attention. She simply returned to her duties. As she always had, when the hall finally emptied and the staff began cleaning up, she felt exhausted, not physically but emotionally. Playing the piano again had stirred something deep inside her. Old memories, old dreams, and emotions she had kept quiet for years had all returned at once. As she stepped outside into the cool night air after her shift ended, she found the philanthropist waiting near the entrance. "I hope I'm not being rude," he said, "but I would like to help you, if you allow it." She was surprised. "Help me how?" "Talent like yours should not remain hidden," he replied. "There are opportunities you deserve to at least see." She felt a sudden mix of hope and fear. Hope, because part of her had always dreamed of returning to music. Fear, because life had taught her not to depend on dreams too much. "I appreciate your kindness," she said carefully, "but my life is complicated. I cannot just leave my responsibilities." "I understand," he said. "I'm not asking you to. I only want you to consider opening one door at a time. For the first time that night, she felt truly uncertain. The door he was speaking of had been closed for many years, and opening it again meant facing the pain of what she had lost along with the chance of what she could gain. That night, she hardly slept. Lying on her small bed, she stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Her fingers moved slowly in the air as if touching invisible piano keys. Every note she had played that evening repeated itself inside her mind. She thought about the years she had spent working nonstop, the responsibilities she carried, the people who depended on her, and also the child she once was, the child who played piano with shining eyes and endless dreams. The next few days passed in a quiet blur. She returned to work, served guests, cleaned tables, carried trays. On the outside, nothing had changed, but inside, everything felt different. A question kept growing stronger with every passing hour. What if life was giving her a second chance? The philanthropist did not push her, but he remained present. He visited the restaurant again a few days later, sitting quietly, watching her work. Their conversations were short but meaningful. He spoke about small concert opportunities, charity events that needed performers, and artists who had once been overlooked just like her. You don't need to leave your job right now, he told her gently. Just take one step. One small step. She began to feel something she had not felt in a long time, belief. One evening after her shift, she stayed behind when everyone had left. The restaurant owner allowed her to use the small piano near the back of the dining hall. The keys were old and slightly worn, but to her, it felt like meeting an old friend. She played alone in the empty room, without an audience, without applause. Just her and the music. Tears quietly rolled down her face as her fingers moved freely once again. She realized then that no matter how far life had pushed her away from music, it had never truly left her heart. A few days later, the philanthropist arranged a small private gathering. Nothing grand. No spotlight. Just a quiet room with a few listeners who genuinely loved music. He invited her to play, not as a waitress, not as a surprise guest, but as a musician. She stood on that small stage with trembling hands and a fast-beating heart. For the first time in many years, she was standing there by choice, not by chance. As her fingers touched the keys, something inside her released. The music flowed naturally, without fear. After the performance, the silence in the room said more than applause ever could. The listeners were deeply moved. Some quietly wiped their eyes. Others simply sat still, as if they needed more time to return to reality. One of them spoke softly. "You carry your life in your music?" Those words stayed with her. Later that night, as she walked home under the dim streetlights, she realized that a turning point had arrived. The waitress who once hid her talent was slowly becoming a woman bold enough to let the world see her truth. Yet, one part of her story still remained hidden. A secret that even the philanthropist did not fully know yet. A secret tied to her early training, her past teachers, and a remarkable connection that would soon change everything. For now, she simply breathed in the night air and allowed herself one quiet smile, because for the first time in many years, she was not just surviving, she was beginning to live again. The day after her small private performance, the waitress returned to her usual routine. The restaurant was buzzing with its usual activity, guests chatting, plates clinking, and the faint hum of background music. Yet for her, the world felt different. Something had shifted within her. She no longer moved through her job like a shadow. There was a quiet confidence in her steps, a subtle energy she hadn't felt in years. The philanthropist had not stopped by yet that morning, but his presence was still felt. Messages of encouragement had been left for her, invitations to small events where her music could be appreciated, and gentle reminders that she had talent worth sharing. Each note made her heart beat faster and filled her with both excitement and anxiety. She was on the edge of a decision that could change her life, and the unknown made her nervous. By mid-afternoon, a sleek black car arrived at the restaurant. The philanthropist stepped out, carrying a folder that seemed to contain plans, invitations, and schedules. His expression was serious but warm, as if he were bringing news that was both important and exciting. He approached her carefully, smiling politely. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. "I just wanted to speak with you about an opportunity." She wiped her hands on a towel, trying to appear calm, though her heart raced. I'm listening," she said softly. He handed her the folder. "These are invitations to perform at a few private events, mostly small gatherings. I think it would be a good way for you to ease back into performing publicly. Nothing overwhelming, just a chance to share your talent." Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the folder. She scanned the invitations, each one confirming what he had said: small, intimate events where the focus would be on the music rather than the person. It felt safe. It felt possible. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted quietly. "It's been so long in my life. It's complicated." "I understand," he said gently. "You don't have to decide everything at once. Just think of it as a small step. No pressure, no expectations." She nodded, holding the folder close to her chest. There was comfort in his words, a feeling that someone finally understood her situation. Yet beneath the relief, a part of her remained cautious. She had spent years hiding her talent. Letting it shine again meant opening herself to scrutiny, criticism, and perhaps even disappointment. A few hours later, as she prepared to leave for the day, the philanthropist spoke again. "Before you go, I need to ask you something. Personal." She looked up, curious but wary. "I know you've been trained in music before, but the way you played yesterday, it was extraordinary. Almost beyond what I expected from anyone your age. There's something more to your background, isn't there?" Her hands froze for a moment. How much could she reveal? Her story was her own, and she had carefully kept certain truths hidden from the world. Yet there was honesty in his voice, a respect that demanded truth, and she realized she could not continue hiding forever. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I studied at a conservatory when I was younger. It's a long story, but I was trained professionally from a very young age." The philanthropist's eyes widened slightly, not in disbelief but in fascination. "A conservatory? That explains so much. It explains your technique, your control, the way you tell a story through music?" She looked down, embarrassed. "I never wanted anyone to know. Life didn't allow me to pursue it, at least not fully. I had to work, to survive, to help my family. Music became something I loved in secret." He nodded slowly, clearly impressed. "You should never have hidden it. Talent like this, it's rare, and it deserves to be shared." For the first time, the waitress felt a sense of release. Years of hiding, of pretending, of living quietly, all seemed to lift a little. Yet she also felt the weight of the choice before her. To let the world see her true ability was not a small step, it was a leap. That evening, the philanthropist arranged a small private gathering at a quiet hall. There were only a few guests, each genuinely interested in music. No cameras, no applause pressure, just people who would listen. When she arrived, she felt nervous but ready. The room was dimly lit, the piano waiting for her as if it had been expecting this moment. She took her seat, fingers hovering over the keys. As she played, something remarkable happened. Her confidence grew with every note, and the music carried not just skill, but deep emotion. It told the story of a life filled with struggle, sacrifice, and hidden talent. The listeners were captivated, some leaning forward in their seats, others closing their eyes, letting the music touch their hearts. By the end of her performance, the room was silent for several moments. Then the applause came, not loud or chaotic, but full of genuine appreciation and awe. The philanthropist approached her with a smile, one that held pride and respect. "Now everyone knows what I've known all along," he said softly. "Your talent is extraordinary. But more than that, your dedication, your humility, that's rare too." She smiled faintly, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. For the first time, she realized that her secret was no longer a burden. It was a gift she could share, and perhaps it was time to let it shine fully. Over the next few weeks, small opportunities began to appear. Private concerts, charity events, and small gatherings where she could perform without pressure. Each time, her confidence grew. People were moved not just by her skill, but by the story she conveyed through every note. And then came the most astonishing moment, the moment that would reveal the stunning secret to the philanthropist and the world. One evening, after a performance at a small charity gathering, a guest approached her. This guest was an older musician, someone who had traveled widely and performed for dignitaries and royalty. As he listened to her play, his eyes widened with recognition. You are who I think you are," he said, his voice trembling slightly. The waitress froze. Could it really be? Could this stranger have recognized her after all these years? "Yes," she whispered, almost afraid to speak. "That's me." The musician stepped closer, his expression filled with awe. "You were one of the most promising students at the conservatory. Your talent? It's still the same, only stronger. People need to know. The world needs to hear you." She realized then that her secret was no longer hers alone. Her past, her talent, and her story were about to become public. Yet she did not feel fear this time. She felt readiness. She had survived life's challenges, and now it was time for her gift to be acknowledged. The philanthropist, who had been observing quietly, finally understood the full magnitude of what he had witnessed. The woman he had first doubted, the waitress who seemed ordinary and invisible, had a past and a skill that few could imagine. She had carried a life of excellence quietly, with humility and grace. And now she was stepping into her rightful place. That night as she walked home, she realized the truth. Her piano was not just an instrument. It was a key to her past, a bridge to her future, and a mirror of her soul. Every note she had played carried her story, and finally, people could see the real her, not the waitress. Not the quiet worker, but the musician who had always been there, waiting for the right moment to shine. For the first time, she felt free. After the revelation of her hidden talent, life for the waitress began to change slowly, yet profoundly. The days that followed were filled with invitations, small performances, and private gatherings where people genuinely appreciated her music. Each opportunity was a gentle step into a world she had long dreamed of, a world she had once imagined as a child sitting at the old piano at home. But now she was moving into it cautiously, carefully, allowing herself to enjoy the journey without being overwhelmed by the sudden attention. The philanthropist remained a steady presence throughout. He never pushed her beyond what she was comfortable with. Instead, he guided her, offering advice, arranging small events, and introducing her to people who could appreciate her art. There was something reassuring in his approach. He treated her not as a novelty or a hidden gem to be exploited, but as a person with depth, skill, and dignity. He reminded her gently that her music mattered, and that the world deserved to hear it. At first, the guests at these events were polite, intrigued, but not fully aware of her full story. They listened, clapped, and complimented her skill, yet most did not realize the years of sacrifice behind each note. That slowly changed. Word began to spread quietly, carefully, about the woman who had been working as a waitress while secretly carrying the training of a conservatory pianist. People were drawn not only to her music, but to her story of perseverance, humility, and quiet strength. It was an inspiring tale, and everyone who heard it seemed to leave with a little more hope in their hearts. Her performances became more frequent. Each time she felt a mix of nerves and excitement, but she reminded herself that this was not a race. There was no need to rush. Music was something personal, something that flowed from her life experiences, and she wanted to share it authentically. With each performance, she noticed subtle changes, not in her skill, which had always been strong, but in the way people listened. They were no longer just hearing music. They were feeling it. They were moved by the story behind the melody, the life she had lived quietly while carrying immense talent within her. One evening, at a small charity concert, she played with more confidence than ever before. The room was intimate, filled with people who had come specifically to hear her. As her fingers glided across the keys, every note told a story of childhood dreams, of late nights practicing, of the struggle of balancing life's responsibilities while keeping a passion alive in secret. By the time she finished, There was silence in the room, a silence that spoke louder than any applause. The audience had been touched not only by her music but by the journey behind it. After the performance, the philanthropist approached her, smiling warmly. "You've done more than play music tonight," he said. "You've shared a piece of your life, and people felt it. That's what makes music extraordinary. It's more than notes. It's emotion, honesty, and courage." She nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. For the first time in years, she understood that her sacrifices had not been in vain. She had carried her talent quietly, patiently. And now it was finally recognized in a way that honored both her skill and her life experiences. News of her story began to spread beyond the small circles of private events. Local newspapers and online platforms wrote about the waitress who stunned audiences with her hidden talent. Social media carried clips of her performances, showing her gentle demeanor juxtaposed with the passion and precision of her playing. Many were surprised, some even astonished, that someone who had appeared ordinary in her day-to-day life could carry such extraordinary skill. Despite the growing attention, she remained grounded. She continued working at the restaurant, serving guests, cleaning tables, and moving through her familiar world with the same humility she had always carried. But now, each step felt lighter. Each smile she shared with a guest carried a little more pride. She had found balance between her everyday responsibilities and the opportunity to share her passion, and it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her life began to change in other ways as well. She was invited to perform at charity galas, school events, and community concerts. Each event brought new audiences, new experiences, and new opportunities. Yet she remained careful, refusing to let fame overshadow the authenticity of her music. She learned to trust her instincts, choosing carefully where and how she performed. The key was not to rush into the spotlight but to grow steadily, letting her talent speak for itself without forcing attention. At one of these events, she met a young student who had just started learning piano. The child struggled with self-doubt and fear of performing, and seeing her, a woman who had carried hidden talent and finally stepped into her true self, inspired him greatly. After her performance, she knelt beside him, speaking gently. "Music is not about perfection," she said. "It's about what you feel when you play. Every note has meaning. Play with honesty, and people will hear your heart." The young student listened carefully, wide-eyed, and for the first time felt a spark of confidence. The waitress realized in that moment that her influence extended beyond applause and recognition. She could inspire others, share lessons not just in music but in life, lessons of perseverance, humility, and courage. Weeks passed, and each day brought a new opportunity or challenge. Some days were easy, filled with smooth performances and warm smiles from audiences. Other days were harder, filled with nerves, self-doubt, or the pressures of balancing her responsibilities with her growing career. But each day reinforced a truth she had long known: talent alone was not enough. It required patience, resilience, and the willingness to embrace change when the moment came. The philanthropist remained a constant guide through this time. He never demanded more than she could give, but he always reminded her of her potential, her worth, and her ability to touch lives with her music. Together they planned small tours, charity performances, and private concerts, carefully building a path that honored both her talent and her personal life. One evening, after a performance at a local charity gala, she stood by the piano, catching her breath. The room was filled with warm applause, genuine smiles, and nods of admiration. She felt a sense of completeness, a recognition that she had been waiting for, without ever knowing she needed it. The philanthropist came over, smiling proudly. "Do you realize what you've done?" he asked softly. "You've shown the world that talent can hide in the most unexpected places. You've reminded everyone here of the power of humility and perseverance. And most importantly, you've reminded yourself of your own strength." She smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude. "I never imagined it would feel like this," she said quietly. "To share my music, to be seen, it's more than I hoped for." "Then it's time," he said, "to keep sharing it wherever you feel ready. The world deserves it, and so do you." Months went by, and her story continued to inspire. The waitress who had once been invisible became a symbol of hidden talent, perseverance, and quiet strength. People spoke about her not just as a musician, but as a person who had lived a life of responsibility while nurturing a gift that could have been lost to time. Her music touched hearts, reminded people of their own dreams, and encouraged them to embrace opportunities they had long feared to pursue through it all. She remained humble, never forgetting the life she had led before the recognition came. She remembered the long hours, the sacrifices, and the quiet moments when she had practiced alone, unsure if anyone would ever hear her music. Those experiences shaped her, made her resilient, and gave depth to her performances. Every note she played carried a lifetime of lessons, love, and hidden dreams. Finally realized, her life had changed, but not in ways she had expected. She did not seek fame, nor did she crave admiration. Instead, she had found balance, fulfillment, and purpose. She had learned that true success is not measured by applause or attention, but by the courage to step forward, share one's gifts, and inspire others along the way. And so, the quiet waitress, once overlooked by most of the world, continued to play her music. Each performance was a reminder of her journey, her hidden talent, and the power of persistence. People who heard her music felt more than sound. They felt the story of a life transformed, of dreams postponed but never abandoned, and of a heart brave enough to finally shine. In the end, it was not just the applause, the recognition, or the invitations that mattered. What truly mattered was the discovery of her own strength, the courage to share her gift, and the joy of inspiring others through her music. The pianist who had been hidden in plain sight had finally emerged, not to seek fame but to live authentically, touch hearts, and remind the world that talent often lives quietly until the right moment calls it into light. And in that quiet strength, she found her greatest reward: peace, fulfillment, and the freedom to be herself at last.